Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to the training for job placement providers to assist individuals with vision loss find employment. First of all, I'm going to introduce myself and introduce who I have with me. And so I'm Kelly Hoglid. I used to be a vocational rehabilitation counselor for service to the blind and visually impaired, but now I am a program specialist for vocational resources here at the Rehabilitation Center for the Blind. And I put together this presentation with Bob here, and I'll let him explain who he is.
Hi, I'm Bob Smith, and I am also a program specialist at the Rehabilitation Center for the Blind. A quick little background, I've been in blind rehab for about 35 years, so I have a little bit of experience, and we would like to share that experience with you. So, I guess ready to get started.
Yep. And so the purpose of this training is to educate job developers, employment specialists, other providers out there that work with individuals with vision loss to help them feel more comfortable and understand vision loss a little bit better and make our individuals that have vision loss more successful in the future. So first of all, just so I can get an attendance and head count, we are going to do like an opening round and introduce ourselves and say your name, your business, your location, and what you know about blindness, or maybe even a myth that you've heard, or something that you might believe is true. That way we kind of get to know you a little bit better, and we'll make it short, and so people don't have to wait to chime in. I'm going to go around and just kind of do a roll call in a way. So if you want, you can also enter anything into the chat box. So first of all, I'll start with April Schulte. Okay. April entered into the chat box. All right. So, is Becky Haslam here? Yep, she is. Career Connections in Mitchell. Carrie Lang.
Yep.
Joe Hinton. How about Jill Beacon? Entered into the chat box. Career Connections in Mitchell. John Garth. All right, Kim Scott.
Yes.
All right. Chris Bishop.
Sure.
Yeah, Chris Bishop here.
All right. Lisa Senencal. How about Matt Simmons?
I'm here. Can you hear us?
I sure can.
All right, thanks.
And Mike Webb.
I'm here.
Pam Yunke.
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Rebecca Thompson. And you entered the chat box. Gotcha. She is with Teach Well Solutions in Sioux Falls. And Ron Gertz.
Yeah, I'm here, right next door.
He's with the Vocational Resources at the Rehabilitation Center for the Blind, too. Sherry Van Leary. How about Sierra Erickson? You enter the chat box. Lifescape Employment Services in Sioux Falls. Stephen Lester. believe you entered into the chat box as well.
Yep.
Volunteers of American Sioux Falls. And Teresa Hirschman, I don't want to slaughter too much. How about Whitney Hubrook?
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome. Okay, well, we're going to just jump right in. We have a lot of information to share with everybody. And so we are going to go ahead and just start. So some misconceptions of blindness. Some people think that maybe with blindness, all they see is black, but really there's a small percentage of people that only see blackness. Some people think that maybe their other senses improve and they hear better than others, but really that's also a myth because they're just using those senses more. It's not that they're heightened in any way. All people with blindness need to use a white cane, when really only about 2% use a white cane or a white dog or guide dog.
You'll be afraid of what you're going to share with others. So hide anything you want to keep private. Click present when you're
Anything a person with blindness does is amazing and superhuman. Also, people think that maybe people with blindness become very wise and insightful. You might see that in some movies. All people with blindness or vision loss need to be supervised all the time. They can't take care of themselves or do work. They are incapable, dependent, and needy. And sometimes people view that in the employment field. Blindness is worse than death or punishment for sin. It's more of a religious myth. Dog guides can take a person with blindness anywhere the blind person wants to go, but really that blind person is actually guiding that dog. People with blindness are always looking for a cure. If you sat too close to the TV or a screen, that you would go blind. That's also a myth. People hurt their eyes. They didn't take care of their eyes, and that caused blindness. Or people who have never had vision do not dream visually. They actually commonly dream, including feelings, sounds, tastes, smells. And if they had vision, they can actually dream pretty vividly. So those are just some misconceptions that people might think. You might have some of those thoughts, but we are going to teach you some things and hopefully clear up some of those myths for you. But in order to fully understand somebody with vision loss, we want you to know about the eye, because our next session we're going to be talking about different eye diseases, and each eye disease affects a different part of your eye. So today we're going to focus on learning about the eye and how we see. So I'm going to have Bob take that away.
This is going to be a general overview of the eye parts. We're not going to get into too much detail, but please, if you have any questions, feel free to type whatever question you have into the chat box or just chime in. That would be fine also. If you have anything that you'd like me to cover that I haven't covered, feel free to ask about that also. I will give you what I know. If I don't know it, we will take time to look it up, and at the next presentation, we'll bring it back again. So let's go ahead and get started. You can see the graphics on the screen. And
Hold on 1 second. Matt, did you say you're unable to hear us? I did mute the audience because there was a lot of feedback, but mine should still be unmuted. Could someone put into the chat box if they could still hear us? Okay, great. Thank you so much.
good.
All right.
All right. So we're going to start at the front of the eye where the light enters the eye. It starts with the cornea, and again, I refer you to the graphic. It's kind of the window of the eye, and you'll note a couple of things about the cornea. First of all, it's the first part of the eye that the light goes through. It is rounded, and if you take a look at it very carefully, you'll see that it's rounded like a magnifier. And actually, it is a minifier. It collects the light from the outside and sends the light through the center of the pupil. And take note that all the light that is received that we see with must go through the pupil. So if you think about that, the entire field you see from right to left, top to bottom, all of that light has to be passed through the cornea. And it works as an opposite of the magnifier. It minifies, it sends the light directly through the pupil, and that's its purpose, to gather light. It's very durable, very tough, extremely transparent, and we have a pressure on the inside that actually gives us that beautiful contour to the cornea. It is extremely sensitive. It receives its nutrition, oxygen, and a lot of hydration from the inside of the eye. There obviously is oxygen that it receives from the outside of the eye, and also hydration from tears. It has no blood vessels. If it had blood vessels in it, we wouldn't be able to see through it clearly. And again, it's living tissue. It still has to receive oxygen, hydration, and nutrition. And again, it does so from the inside and somewhat from the outside of the eye. The next part is the sclera, and it's the white part of the eye, and that every place where there is not cornea, there is sclera. And again, it's a very tough, leathery type tissue. If you, in biology in high school, had a chance to dissect an eye, you probably remember that even cutting it with an extremely sharp scalpel was extremely difficult. It's very leathery, very durable, which is good. We have an interior pressure, again, that keeps the eyeball round. And the sclera is basically opaque. It's not totally opaque. If you are driving late in the day or early in the morning and the sun is at the side, you know that as soon as the light hits the side of your eye, it just turns everything milky white and you can't really see anything. And so it's somewhat translucent. Light will pass through, but it has to be extremely bright light. It does have blood vessels for its nourishment. Immediately under the cornea is a body of liquid called aqueous humor, which aqueous is from aqua, meaning water. Humor is another way of saying water. So we have watery water, essentially, is what it's described as. And this is produced on the inside of the eye. It does a couple of things. First of all, it provides the pressure necessary to maintain the shape of the eyeball, but it also provides fresh nutrition, oxygen, and hydration to the cornea and lens. And it is reproduced once every 6 to 8 hours as a fresh material. And obviously it's being produced continuously. So it's totally refreshed in 6 to 8 hours, but that is occurring ongoing. Normal range of interocular pressure is anywhere from about 11 to 20. So if you hear a person is talking about glaucoma, they probably have pressures anywhere from 20 on up, and it can go quite high. we're talking 40, 50 range. So, but that would obviously be extreme glaucoma. So just letting you know what the normal range is so that if you ever encounter someone who is talking about their interocular pressures, which is IOP, you will understand that it should be somewhere between 11 and 20. Below 11, the eye becomes too flexible, too pliable. Above 20, it's way too tight, and the problems begin to occur in the eye. The iris is the colored part of the eye. It is the part also which controls the light coming into the eye, and it basically opens when it is dark or in the surrounding area, and it closes when it's too bright for the eye to receive the light. It can also help somewhat in focus, as it's controlling the amount of area that we are seeing. It also moderates the temperature of the eye by bleeding off heat or, again, receiving heat, depending upon what is necessary. The next part is the lens. This part takes the light which has been gathered from the cornea and focus to go through the pupil, and the next part it goes through is the lens, which finishes the focus. Now 60% of the focus comes from the cornea itself, and only 40% is accommodated using the lens. And the lens merely changes shape to focus the image depending upon the distance from the front part of the eye to the object being viewed. The lens will change its shape, rounder for near, flatter for distance, and it focuses the light onto the retina so that we see a clear image. The lens also is a barrier between the front part of the eye, the anterior portion, and the back part of the eye, the posterior portion, to keep the aqueous, which is the aqueous humor, the liquid in the front part of the eye, separate from the vitreous humor, which fills the back part of the eye. And now we're going to talk about the vitreous. The vitreous is a very clear material. All the parts of the eye are so clear that they are unreproducibly clear. We can't get air that clear, water that clear. We can't get glass that clear. There's nothing in nature that is clearer than the clarity of the parts of the eyeball. The vitreous is also extremely clear, extremely transparent. It fills the entire back of the eyeball, and it is there to maintain the shape of the eye. And obviously, we want that perfect contour, which allows us to focus the light onto the retina with, again, a perfect contour, and therefore we have a perfect image as a result. Has the consistency of Jell-O, but it has a more durability like egg white. In other words, if Jell-O, if you have ever seen at a church function or something, Jell-O that's in a cake pan and it's sliced, and if you nick it a little bit, it can actually split and divide. Vitreous will not do that. Vitreous is very cohesive and it holds together extremely well. It also keeps the retina in contact with the blood supply layer below the retina, allowing the retina to be fed, nourished, hydrated, oxygenated completely. The retina is the receptive, the light receptive part of the eye. It receives the light. It's all the way at the back of the eyeball. It provides central and peripheral view. Again, it's the part that's sensitive to the light. And the macula is located directly behind the pupil and the lens. If you could draw a straight line through the center of the pupil and the lens, it would end up directly in the center of the macula. And in the center of that is another part called the fovea, and we'll talk about that later. The macula is the part of the eye that holds the cones, and they are responsible for, first of all, acuity, which is the sharpness and crispness of view. And if you think about it, you see, for example, on the cross section of the eye, we have words like sclera and vitreous, and they are black print on a white background. And the acuity is the ability to see a sharp, crisp change between the black and the white of the letters. And it's the sharpness and crispness of view. The other part of the cones is color. So all the colors we see, and we have 3 basic receptors, red, green, blue, which is where the RGB monitor came from, the red, green, blue monitor, attempting to reproduce all the colors that the eye can see. It didn't work out quite that well, but it was a good concept. But the cones help us to see color. So any color we see would be a combination of red, green, blue receptors, and of course our brain is interpreting that. The choroid is that support layer immediately under the retina. And if you take a look at it, you'll note that just beyond the cornea, the choroid starts. So even where there is the sclera on the outside, the retina is on the inside. So you can see that it really covers a major portion of the back of the eye. And the support layer is immediately below the retina, and it provides all the nutrition, oxygen, and hydration necessary for the retina to flourish. It is also the passageway for the nerves. The nerves collect between the 2 layers, and they are transmitted, of course, to the optic nerve, where the messages are carried to the brain. So we have right at the juncture between the eyeball itself and the transmission point to the brain is the optic nerve head. It is the exit point for the optic nerve in the eye. And if you think about it, the rest of the eyeball is encapsulated with the cornea and the sclera. So, and these are very, very leathery, durable parts of the eye, and the pressures within the eye are all contained because of the cornea and the sclera. The optic nerve is the only place where we have a flexible point other than, again, the cornea or the sclera. It is also where all the blood is supplied to the eye through the optic nerve head. And this portion of the back of the eyeball, the optic nerve head, does not have receptors. So you might have heard that you have a blind spot in your eye, and yes, you do, and it's a result of the optic nerve head where there are no receptors. Okay. Then we come to the optic nerve, and the optic nerve is simply a bundle of nerves that have received information as a result of the stimulation of the light on the retina, and it is a transmission point between the eyeball and the brain itself. Also, again, the blood supply comes through the optic nerve. So, and the entire eyeball, all the blood supply for the entire eyeball comes through the optic nerve. And again, it carries the messages from the eyeball to the brain. The occipital lobe of the brain, which is at the back of the head, kind of at the lower part of the back of the brain, it is the main receiver of the information from the optic nerve. Now, you kind of have to say that tongue in cheek, because the bottom line is the entire brain is used for vision. And there's a lot of analysis that goes on with the transmission, and we'll get into some of that later, but basically the main receiving point for the information from the retina is to the occipital lobe. Again, it's not the only place that provides visual perception or the interpretation of the information. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? Now would be a good opportunity to ask questions if you have any.
I unmuted your mic so you can go ahead and talk if you do have any questions.
Okay, well, we might just continue then.
Yep. So feel free to enter any questions along the way into the chat box. Or we will ask.
I'm not finding the chat box.
So there's a little, kind of like a little circle at the bottom left of your screen. So at the bottom of your screen.
Oh, okay, got it.
Okay, all right. Great.
Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, are there any questions? Okay, well, I think we could continue then. It's important for us to understand how we see, because when you're working with a person who is blind, visually impaired, it really is a matter of analysis. What is the problem that's going on? And how does that impact the person who is trying to work in this particular setting? And how can we manipulate the environment in such a way that it helps the person who is starting this new job? And the bottom line is, if we know how they see, and we know the problems that can occur and what kinds of effects they have, we can kind of understand, and I realize it's going to be a general understanding, but it gives us an idea of what kind of a problem they're having and what we might do to help them. And so it's kind of an analysis. It's an analysis of what the person is seeing and comparing that to the environment they want to work in. So we're going to start with how we see. And basically, we need light to be able to see. We have two types of light, direct light and reflected light. A direct light would be like somebody strikes a match and the flame is a direct light. A light bulb would be a direct light, or a headlamp to a car would be a direct light. Reflected light is the light that, let's say, comes from the sun and it strikes the earth. And if you think about it, this is an interesting concept, because the light leaves the sun or the light source, even a flashlight or that match. It goes through the atmosphere, through space, and it does not emit its energy or our ability to see it is not available until the light strikes something and is reflected back from it. So, in other words, we look into the atmosphere, it's absolutely clear until we see an object. And that object, the reason we are seeing that object is because light from a light source, either the lights in the ceiling or from a lamp around, or the sun, which reflects from that object, and we are perceiving the reflected light. So we have two light sources. We have direct light and we have reflected light. The characteristics of light are, first of all, brightness. It can be just a little bit of light that we're seeing, or it can be a lot of light that we're seeing. It can be differences in color. And again, it's required that we have some light source in order to see any colors. As the light sources are becoming dimmer, like later on in the evening and eventually at night, as it becomes dimmer, things become grayer and darker and eventually black. We can't see anything because there's insufficient light to be able to perceive it. And color is a matter of what particular wavelengths of light are being reflected from whatever object we are seeing. The direction of light is extremely important, and we'll be talking about this a lot. Obviously, if somebody shines a flashlight in your eyes, it's a very inappropriate direction, and all it does is flood our eyes with light, and we can't use that at all. On the other hand, if somebody uses that same flashlight to shine it, say, on an object on the ground, we get a light that's cascading to the object. It reflects back to our eyes and it becomes extremely usable. When I think about light direction, I always think about a theater setting. You have the lights behind, you have a kind of a subdued light in the main area where people are seated. The light being projected from behind is projected to the stage and directly to the person who is speaking or singing or whatever is happening on the stage. And man, the visibility of that person is incredible. And so we definitely want to take a look at light direction, make sure that the direction of the light is usable and valuable versus the unusable light, which we term glare. And glare is generally used as a term for any kind of light that is not usable to the person. The closer you are to a light source, the brighter, pardon me, the brighter and more vivid color you get as a result. We use an actual law. There's a law about it, or a rule about it. It's called the half squared law. There are other terms for that, but basically it's the half squared law, which simply means if you decrease the distance between the light source and the object being viewed by half, it will square the amount of light available. So it makes a gigantic change very rapidly the closer you get to the light source. Obviously, therefore, the farther from the light source, the dimmer and grayer things become. And you can tell this if you have an opportunity to look into the distance versus looking very, very close at objects. You'll see, for example, standing in front of a red barn, directly in front of it, it's going to be very bright and extremely detailed and vivid. If you see that same barn, but 5 miles away or even 2 miles away, you'll find that the colors are muted and the detail is gone. And the idea is that the farther you are from the light source, the dimmer and grayer things become. The narrower angle of reflection that we have, the brighter the object. In other words, if we take a flashlight in our hand and we shine it basically straight on from our face down to, like a headlamp, from our face down to an object, that object is going to be reflected very brightly. And the color will be brighter also. If we shine that same light from the side, so we, rather than looking at the bug on the sidewalk with a flashlight from our head, a headlamp, we take that same flashlight and we put it almost onto the sidewalk and shine that light at the bug from the side, we'll find that the bug itself is going to appear a darker color, a dimmer color, and grayer. It'll have a lot less color. And then we have ambient light versus focused light or reading light or task light. Ambient light is the general amount of light in the room. So if we have an overhead light and it's basically generally lighting the entire room, this is giving us a general reflected light throughout the room. If we are doing a particular task, we want to get a sliver out of our finger. At that point, we probably want a bright reading lamp, and obviously we want to get very close to what it is we are looking at, our finger in this case. And we want a lot of bright light, and we want it extremely focused on the area we're trying to see very, very clearly. And so we are making use of both of these types of light, both ambient light in the room versus focused light. And we'll talk about the benefits of each as we go on. In color, we have direct light and reflected light again. Direct light would be, for example, we were talking about a theater earlier, and sometimes the person who is projecting the light onto the stage will want a red color. And they'll put a gel into that light, but it'll still be a direct light, which is colored as a result of a gel. And then we also have reflected light in terms of color. And so if we look at any particular object, you look around the room and you see a green object or a red object, that object is receiving light. And basically, depending upon the light, the spectrum of light that's produced by that light source, what is being reflected is the color we are seeing. So if we're seeing something green, that is the color or the wavelength of light that's being reflected regarding all of the available wavelengths of light as a result of our direct light source. The light that we are seeing, the color we are seeing, is a specific wavelength being reflected. All the other wavelengths of light are being absorbed. And that's why we don't see all the colors of light. We know that in light we have the Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. And these colors are all being reflected by the sun, for example, or from the sun at some point or another, depending upon what objects we're looking at. If we see something red, only the red color is being reflected. All the rest of the colors are being absorbed by that object. We also have glare. And glare is a matter of the angle of the light regarding our eyes or regarding the object, the amount of reflection from whatever direction, and the light sources which are available. If we have extremely bright light sources, it's going to be easy to produce a lot of glare. If we have subdued light sources, it's going to be harder to have glare, but it may also be harder to see things. So these are the factors that are involved in producing glare: the angle of light, the reflection of light, and the light sources available. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. I don't know necessarily if I'm saying this in a way that is understandable, so feel very free to ask questions.
All right. So we're going to clear up some definitions for you guys. Legal blindness. So this would be like a definition that Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, would use and follow. So legal blindness is 2200 or less in the better eye, or a visual field of 20 degrees or less in the better eye. And so what do we mean when we say 2200? So I'm going to kind of give you guys an example. So say you're standing next to somebody and you have perfect vision. So perfect vision is 20/20. And you're standing next to somebody who has 2200. Now you're going to be looking down the road at a sign. And you can see that sign 200 feet away. And the person next to you can't see it. So you have to walk with that person all the way up to 20 feet away from that sign. So that person with 2200 has to be 20 feet away from that sign in order to see it, where you saw it with 200 feet away. Did I do that correctly? All right. So that's how big of a difference it is in order to see 2200. And also, to get a driver's license in South Dakota, you have to have 20/40 vision. So it's just slightly less than somebody with perfect vision, which is 20/20. So totally blind or blindness. It's usually thought of being blind, that they only see blackness. But most considered blind can see something. So there's such a varied degree of people with vision loss. I mean, they can be 2200, 20/40, 20/60. They can have some spots in their vision. They can see if the light's on or off, or maybe they only can see something called count fingers, where if you hold fingers up a foot or two away from your face, they'd only be able to see how many fingers you're holding up, but nothing further than that. So there's such a variety of different phases or different angles that people can see. And so make sure to take that in consideration when you're working with individuals with vision loss, that they have a variety. So the person sitting next to them might have vision loss or be considered blind, but they actually can see differently than the person, even though they might say they're blind.
Most people who are considered blind can see something. And that's a very important consideration. Just because they have a description of blindness does not mean they can't see. And we need to take that into consideration every time. It would be appropriate to simply ask a person, what can you see? And if they say, well, I can't see anything, then we're talking about a person who is actually totally blind. But most people will talk to you about what their vision actually is. And they may describe it anything from, I can see light over here, to I can see shadows, to I can see, but it's in a tiny spot or something like that. But most people considered blind or described as blind can see something.
Perfect. And vision impairment. So that's usually considered anyone who has any form of vision loss beyond normal vision. And that is after correction with glasses, contacts, or treatment. And so somebody might say they have vision loss, but once they go to the eye doctor and get a new pair of glasses, they can see well again. And so the people that have correction with glasses are not considered people with a vision impairment because it can be corrected. And usually people with vision impairments are between 20/60 to 2200, but again, that can vary. So some other vision problems to note, so they may have 2200 vision, but they may also have night blindness. So with different eye conditions, they need that light. And so when there's that lack of light, like Bob was talking about, they may become totally blind at night and not be able to see anything. And so they struggle in the evenings and at nighttime. So those individuals with different forms of vision loss that we'll talk about next time, finding a job at night may not be the best for them because they will struggle to get to and from a place because of their night blindness. And so finding a day job would be a lot better for that individual. They may struggle with depth perception. Both of our eyes are different altogether. So if they've got an eye disease in one eye, it may progress differently in the other eye. And so sometimes they have one good eye and one bad eye. And when their vision is different in the two separate eyes, it causes depth perception issues. And so with those, it could be hard to go down steps or curbs or even just reaching for a glass of water on the table. They may knock it over. Some people may have some double vision that's going on with their eyes. And that can be frustrating and cause headaches and cause other issues as well. And when you're working with somebody with vision loss, they may say that their vision can vary day to day or even vary throughout the day. So maybe their vision is better in the morning, and then as the day goes on, it starts to get worse. So that is a thing where they can have good days and bad days, or that their vision can just fluctuate throughout the day. And then with somebody that has vision loss, they will have some fatigue or even blurring out. Their eyes may tire a lot more because they're using them and trying to focus a lot harder than somebody with vision that's perfect.
It's in continual adjustment if they have a vision problem. And so they're constantly trying to focus to see clearer, and that constant movement of the eye and the constant changing is a big problem for fatigue and blurring out.
Now some fun facts about blindness. So we pulled up some blindness statistics. So here in Sioux Falls, people that are blind or visually impaired, there's about 2,200 people here within Sioux Falls. So it's actually a pretty small community. In South Dakota, there's somewhere between 9,000 and 15,000 individuals that have either blindness or that are visually impaired. And then in the whole United States, there's about 14 million, and it depends on where you look for your source, and so that estimation can vary, and it also can vary on people claiming that they have vision loss or not. But in the whole world, it's estimated to have as high as 285 million people, which is almost equivalent to the population of the United States. About 8 out of 10 people over the age of 75 have some functional vision loss. And as we age, we do end up with different forms of vision loss, and some can be hereditary, and some can just come over time, and we'll explain a lot more of that next session. And hearing loss. So with vision loss, there can be hearing loss. So half of those with vision loss over the age of 75 may also have a form of hearing loss.
One thing to note about that, as people get older, they can have these problems developing, and older actually starts at about age 40, and I think you guys know what I mean. At about age 40, things they tend not to work the way they used to. And so vision problems can develop, hearing problems can develop, other problems can develop. And it's important to note the combination of problems, because if you have blindness only, you're the only thing you're really accommodating is the blindness. That's all. If you have hearing loss only, the only thing you're accommodating is the hearing loss. But if you have the combination of blindness and hearing loss, it's not accommodating just blindness anymore. It's not accommodating just hearing loss anymore. The two added together actually multiply the impairment. So if you have a person that has blindness as a disability and they have some other form of disability, you're going to find a much greater problem trying to deal with the person. And while I'm on that topic, I just wanted to add that there are many people in the world who are blind. I know literally hundreds of people who are blind or visually impaired, and they function very, very well. It's not rocket science to help someone who has blindness as a disability. It's a matter of finding out what the problems are that the person is having and doing everything that is possible to try to help them. And while I say that, people who come to the rehab center, everyone who comes in is a different person and they have a different problem, even if it's a vision loss. We have to take a look at the person, the individual, and we have to ask them what kinds of difficulties they're having. And we have to learn a lot about them. And we have to talk about what we could do to help that particular individual. And each person is new and each person is different. And the point I'm trying to make is that's what you have to do when you're on the job with the person. You have to ask them, well, what are you having problems with? And when we find a problem that they're having, let's say they're saying, well, the lighting in the room, it's just not bright enough. I can't see anything on the desk. Well, we have to add light to that particular area. If another person is saying this window is just producing so much light, I can't see anything, we may have to subdue the light from the window. If a person says, well, these parts don't contrast enough with the background, we may have to, if it's a silver part that we're working with, we may have to put a black background behind it to help the person be able to see. But I wanted to add to that, it's sometimes tricky and difficult to take a look at some of the problems, but that's why we are here. And I really want to stress that if you run into a situation and you don't know how to handle it, or you just would like some ideas or some suggestions on what you might do to improve the circumstances for an individual you're working with, please feel free to call the Rehab Center for the Blind. We don't always know the answers, but when we don't know the answers, like I said, I know hundreds of people, and between all of us here, we literally know in the thousands of people who have vision problems. And if we don't know the answer, we can call one of them and say, hey, what do you do in this case? And they can give us what they do in that case, and that can help us to solve the problem. So, take a look at the situation, ask the questions to the student, find out, what the problems are that they are having. And it's just like any other accommodation for any other disability. If they're having problems ambulating, we're going to want to take a look at the environment and seeing what the impact of that is in the environment and try to alter that impact somehow, influence it. And it's the same thing we want to do for a person who is blind or visually impaired. So I want to stress too that our goal is to help people, period. And when we go out and we're taking a look at a particular job that a person has to do in the environment they're working in, we are analyzing from the very beginning that work environment to see what is good, what is not working, and we are becoming very creative in how we approach that environment to see if we can manipulate that environment. And that's what we need with a person who is blind or visually impaired. A little bit of creativity and understanding what the problems are and seeing what kinds of changes we can make in the environment to improve the circumstance for the student who wants to be employed. So it's first of all, it's not that hard to work with a person who is blind, visually impaired. Secondly, if you run into problems that you just don't know what else to do with, please give us a call and we will provide these resources. We have a person on staff, Ron Gertz, who is an employment specialist, an experienced person working with blind, visually impaired. And he is amazingly creative in resolving problems for people on the job. So I strongly encourage you to contact us or contact Ron and talk to him about the kinds of things that you might be struggling with on whatever location with a student who wants to be employed.
And one of the best ways to understand somebody that has vision loss is to just ask them, tell me what it's like looking through your eyes. And so they can give you a good amount of detail just by asking that one statement. We are going to open it up for questions now. We saved time in this presentation in order to be here to answer any questions that you may have, because we just want to be a good resource for you. And so I will unmute you guys, and so feel free to blurt out any questions, and we are ready.
Can you give us the phone number?
Yes, yep. So the phone number here at the Rehabilitation Center for the Blind is 605, of course, 367-5260.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Like right away at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about some misperceptions. Is there any misperceptions that you guys want to clear up or get more clarity on? Or maybe have a thought about one and just wondering if it's true or not?
Well, I just know that I had a friend who could only see right in front of her, that the peripheral vision wasn't there. It was just tunnel vision, and just some of the struggles she faced. And then I had somebody else tell me that it's the peripheral that they see. They don't see straight in front. So, you know, everything is varied, like you said, based on each individual. But it's kind of interesting. And it's a lot of information to take in that you don't realize how complex the eye is.
That is a very true statement. I marvel at the question of evolution, because in order for, in my case right now, I have had cataracts. I had my cataracts removed, and immediately afterward, I started developing secondary cataracts. When a cataract is removed, basically it's the lens of the eye, and we'll talk about this later, but I just wanted to review this. It's basically the lens of the eye, and the lens is actually free floating in a tissue capsule. And it has a front sort of a sleeve and a back sort of a sleeve, and it's encapsulated in the middle. And for focusing, for example, there are little tiny hair-like muscles all the way around this capsule that pull and stretch the lens flatter to be able to see farther away. And of course, when they're relaxed, it becomes more bulbous. But the point is that mine started changing after age 50. I started developing cataracts, and I've had them removed. And since then, I've had secondary cataracts, and now I have an opacification in the remaining tissue that they left behind, and I have to accommodate it. And these tiny little changes, this tiny little change in that tiny little bit of tissue that at one point in time surrounded my lens is causing me not to be able to see. And I know, if you get a little too much wind in your eye, all of a sudden your eye starts to blur out. If you have a little bit too much light in front of you, you're looking a little bit toward the sun, you can't see anymore. If you feel sick, has anybody ever had tunnel vision as a result of being ill?
Or a migraine.
Yeah, or a migraine, or somebody flashes a camera and now you've got a yellow-green spot in your vision for the next 5 minutes. And so little tiny changes can make big results in terms of being able to see. And if you think of all the systems that are available in the eye, we've got an eye socket, and we've got eyebrows and eyelids, and we've got tears and an oil layer, and it just goes on and on and on. We've got a cornea that has to have a very specific pressure, and we have aqueous that has to nourish it because there are no blood vessels. The only tissue in the entire body that doesn't have blood vessels, it has to be nourished and hydrated and oxygenated. And we have to keep it from drying out. So we have to have tears and tear ducts, and it just goes on and on and on. The multitude, the iris, the lens, producing a lens that's crystal clear, and all the parts of the eye have to be absolutely crystal clear. And the capsule and the muscles and the production point for the aqueous humor in the front part of the eye, and the vitreous and the retina and the complexity to the retina. And all of these things have to function perfectly immediately. I have some serious questions about how you could ever produce anything like that in an evolutionary process. And we're talking only about the eye. So anyway, it's just an aside. I just have a real question about how that could ever have taken place. Even the most simple eye just is so complex that producing it in an evolutionary process is very baffling to me.
Well, thank you, Bob. The questions are for them, not for you.
Sorry.
I have a question.
That's good.
All right, Ron, what is your question?
Does the color of your eye affect your vision at all?
I have never been asked that before, and I've never even thought about it before.
So in my studies or my readings, I have just heard that, or read, that people with like blue eyes or the lighter color eyes may be a little more sensitive to light. And so somebody with brown eyes, maybe typically they don't wear sunglasses outside because it doesn't affect their vision as much as it would with somebody with blue or green eyes. And so they're a little more sensitive.
Very good question.
Okay.
My eyes are two different colors.
Oh, interesting. That's cool.
Like we said, your eyes are two different organs, and so they can be completely different.
I can't
Right.
hear you.
There,
I'm sorry. I clicked what she said.
Oh, like I had mentioned earlier, your eyes are two different
I'm not-
organs.
I'm
And
not
so-
hearing her.
Oh, you just.
Each eye is different. Even in an individual, each eye is different. And that's an important point because this means that if you have one person with macular degeneration and another person with macular degeneration, it doesn't mean they see the same thing. And I would carry that to an extreme and say that if I look at an object that's red and you look at an object that's red, we probably will not see it the same. However, we'll describe it the same because remember that it's a reaction to a wavelength of light. So when I was a very tiny baby and growing up, my folks would point at something that was red and tell me it was red. And remember, this is a wavelength of reflected light that is being received by my eye. And I'm remembering that when my eye receives this wavelength of light, that it is red. And so are you. And for the same reasons, because we've had a pairing of this particular wavelength of light with the description, with a verbal description of the word red. However, it doesn't mean that we are seeing the same color. As a matter of fact, I'd have a question, and to be as blatant as possible, I would ask, is my red the same as your blue? Now, it doesn't mean that we're not going to describe an object as red if it is reflecting a red color. It just means that my vision might not be anything like your vision in terms of what we're actually seeing. And if you think about it, the reception in the eye, the light comes through the front part of the eye, it strikes the receiving part of the eye, the retina, and it hits this nerve cell, which is a chemical receptor from a wavelength of light. And it excites the receptor, and that produces a chemical transmission through a nerve body, which produces a slight electrical transmission to the next nerve. And of course, we have the synapse, which is a chemical transmitter between one nerve cell and the next nerve cell. And this happens a multitude of times, millions of times, to carry that information at virtually the speed of light to the occipital lobe. Now, if our nerve cells are not the same, and I tongue-in-cheek sort of ask my students, what did you have for breakfast? Because that changes the chemical composition in our bodies. And does that change the chemical composition, therefore, in our nerves? And so our transmissions are different. And my question is, how many nerve cells do you have? How many nerve cells do I have? How many nerve cells do you have in your right eye versus how many nerve cells do you have in your left eye? And so if they are not absolutely identical, how could it possibly be that it would be an identical reception in terms, or perception maybe is a better way to say it. How could we possibly have the same perception? And the number of cells that we have, for example, it's not just what cells, it's the number of cells, and it's the length of cells, and it's the combination of cells, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's also our experiences. We dream, and we dream in vision. Have you ever dreamed things that you've never seen in your entire life? Or can you dream things? Even right now, if you're sitting here, could you dream of, let's say, a chartreuse horse? And if you can conceive that at all, that's not something you've seen before, and your brain is actually creating it. Further, we have a right eye, a left eye, and each eye is a different perspective. And if you look at your house from the sidewalk out in front of your house, if you look at your house from the right side to the front door, and then you walk across the sidewalk to the left side and you look at the exact same house from the left side, we have a difference in perspective. We have two eyes that are apart, and that should produce two unique images, and our brain is actually putting it together into a single clear image. And that means that the images must be altered. So if you think about this, how is it possible that we could ever see the same things when we are looking at something? And that's very particularly true in the exact image we're seeing versus the color we're seeing versus the brightness we're seeing, et cetera, et cetera. So the images can't be the same. But obviously we have a lot of similarities in our view because we can communicate the similarities based on mutual experience.
All right. We have a question on what's coming up next. And so next session, we are going to talk about the most common eye diseases and also how can we accommodate them, simply accommodate them on the job, or what are some common ways that we can do little fixes in order to maximize their vision and help them see better. And so we'll be talking a lot about those different eye diseases that you guys may come across in the future. And the session number 3, we're going to talk about common courtesies, like how to approach somebody with vision loss. We'll talk about light and glare. Common courtesies on how to.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, how to work with individuals, how to, what you can say that's not offensive to them. Different things we don't think about that sighted people don't think about on a regular basis. We'll learn more about light and glare control, and then we'll educate you guys on common aids, low vision aids, and devices, and then how to manipulate the working environment and how a person gets from one place to the other. How are they going to get from the street to the door to their seat at work? And we'll talk about orientation and mobility and some barriers that you guys may come across or may have already come across. And then we've created kind of an intake form, so how to understand somebody with vision loss when you first meet them, when a counselor makes a referral to you as an employment specialist, what information is most important to gather in order to help that individual be successful with employment. And then the last session, we just have down for 1 hour. And we've put together a variety of resources, individuals with names and phone numbers, and also some online resources that you might already be familiar with, but just for good reminders. And then if we're lucky, we'll have some current providers that commonly work with individuals with vision loss answer some questions for us and talk about some experiences. So that's what the rest of this training looks like. Is there any more questions out there? If not, we might end a little bit early.
I would like to say thank you for participating. We are so grateful that there are people out there who want to provide services to people who are blind and visually impaired. It is sometimes difficult for us to find someone who is willing to take a person with a visual impairment. I think that at times there's a fear about taking someone with a visual impairment. But in reality, it's just a person with another type of problem. And one of the things that we will be dealing with in the future I produced a list of things to consider when you are working with a person who has a visual impairment, and you can just literally go through the list, ask questions, take a look at how people are responding in the environment, and apply some very simple ideas to help a person be able to do whatever it is they want to be able to do better. And so it really is as straightforward as any other person that you work with. And I am just wanting to tell you thank you, because it's just wonderful that you're willing to take this time and learn and be able to help people who are blind, visually impaired across our state.
All right. Well, we will meet again on Wednesday, July 24th. So 2 weeks from today. And I plan to send out the next PowerPoint at least a week in advance again. And we will be same time, 8:30 Central Time. And let me know if you have any questions between now and then. Feel free to email me or give us a call. Again, the number at the Rehabilitation Center for the Blind is 605-367-5260. All right. Well, I hope you guys have a good rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Take good care, and thank you again.
Kelly, can you hang on after everybody hangs up?
Sure.